The proverb says that a beautiful gourd does not guarantee sweet water within, and this ancient wisdom became the tragic destiny of Chief Henry Akinola, the telecommunications billionaire whose wealth built glass towers across Lagos Island. He was a man whose reach was global, his reputation unblemished, yet the serenity of his magnificent Ikoyi compound, the E-Lady, was utterly corrupted not by business rivals, but by the very woman he had brought to share his life, Vivian. Henry had married Vivian, a strikingly beautiful and impeccably groomed socialite whose presence commanded attention in every elite Lagos gathering following the death of his first wife. He believed he was choosing a sophisticated companion who matched his standing, mistaking her flawless exterior for an equally flawless character. What he truly embraced was a hidden viper. His sons, young David and little Sam, were silent witnesses to their new stepmother's initial warmth cooling into a calculated indifference, revealing the hard, cold core of her ambition. Henry, perpetually absorbed in the monumental task of managing his continental empire, remained dangerously oblivious to the small, corrosive acts of cruelty she performed daily, seeing only the expensive tranquility and staged domestic perfection Vivian so skillfully maintained for his benefit. The malice was insidious, a slow spiritual drain on the family's well-being. Mama Grace, Henry's aged, gentle, and deeply revered mother, had been the sole source of unwavering comfort for the boys, offering the steady affection their father's constant absence could not supply. Vivian, however, viewed Mama Grace not as a respected matriarch, but as a stubborn relic and a constant threat to her undisputed dominion over Henry's wealth and household. Vivian's campaign began with displacement. She banished the old woman and the boys from the opulent main wing of the mansion to the small, poorly ventilated staff annex near the compound's perimeter fence, claiming the primary bedrooms were urgently needed for her private collection of European artworks. She replaced their nourishing, prepared meals with watery soups and discarded remnants from the household staff's kitchen, citing unnecessary dietary extravagance. She also confiscated their laptops and designer clothes, labeling them decadent distractions, and forced them into plain, uncomfortable attire, cynically declaring she was instilling much-needed humility. The old woman and the children never breathed a word of complaint to Henry. The profound cultural rule dictates that one must never burden the mighty pillar of the home with the small, petty woes of the hearth. They suffered their daily insults in a quiet, prayerful hope for the restoration of peace. On a blisteringly hot afternoon, the air thick with the humid weight of the city and the distant metallic clang of harbour machinery, Vivian's spite reached a planned culmination. She had spent the last hour observing Mama Grace struggling near the back wall, painfully bent over a bucket, trying to hand-wash the boys' threadbare school uniforms with cold water, a chore the household laundry team was now strictly barred from undertaking. Vivian glided out onto her gleaming shaded terrace, clad in a featherlight imported caftan, her face set in a look of profound, bored superiority. In her hand, she carried a stainless steel basin brimming with foul, dark water, the residue from washing her expensive hair weave and chemical treatments. She moved with deliberate, unhurried steps to the edge of the stone railing overlooking the dusty yard. She found Mama Grace kneeling and the two boys scrubbing tirelessly beside her. Vivian paused, savouring the prolonged instant of anticipation before the blow. Her beautiful face twisted into a flicker of pure, unadulterated contempt, a silent declaration of her victory over the old order and Henry's former life. Meanwhile, entirely undetected by the sprawling security apparatus, Chief Henry Akinola's private helicopter had made an unscheduled, silent landing on his rooftop helipad. A critical multi-million-dollar regulatory hearing in Abuja had been abruptly adjourned, granting him an unexpected window of several free hours, a scarcity in his life. Rather than calling ahead and mobilizing the usual retinue, he felt an immediate, uncharacteristic urge to simply walk in, hoping to catch a candid moment with his family. He dismissed his security team and walked the internal staff staircase, emerging into the compound's rear corridor. He yearned to see his mother and his sons without the formality and pretense, hoping to witness a moment of genuine loving chaos. He moved quickly, his crisp, immaculate attire feeling foreign in the hot, unventilated passage, stepping from the cool shadow into the stark, unforgiving light of the late afternoon yard. He stopped, his imposing shadow cast sharply against the ground, his homecoming joy instantly replaced by a visceral shock. He witnessed a chilling act of casual savagery. The beautiful, elegant Vivian tilted the heavy basin over the railing, not stumbling or apologizing, but with a slow, cruel intention. The oily, chemical-laced dark water arced down, hitting Mama Grace first, splashing directly over her tightly coiled hair and simple gown, causing her to cry out in a muted, pained gasp. The remaining sludge cascaded over the small pile of David and Sam's uniforms they had just scrubbed, instantly coating the fabric in a foul, dark film. The boys reacted not with anger, but with an instant, terrified concern for their grandmother, instinctively moving to steady her. Vivian watched the filthy spray soak their agony before turning and retreating into the main house's cool sanctuary with a flick of her hand, as if disposing of insignificant trash. Henry saw the act, not as an accident, but as a deliberate, calculated humiliation. His breath caught painfully in his throat, his overwhelming rage battling with profound self-loathing. The billionaire was home, unannounced, and the sight of his mother and son's silent, immediate resignation to the abuse was the true, final moment that shattered his world. The moment stretched into an agonizing stillness, a silence more condemning than any sudden roar. Chief Henry Akinola remained rigid in the entranceway, a man of massive power suddenly rendered impotent by the venomous truth. He watched his sons, David and Sam, their small forms now shielding Mama Grace, their hands quickly wiping the viscous residue from her face and head tie. There were no tears or outbursts of childish rage, only a profound, internalized shame and the speed of practiced obedience. That quiet, immediate resignation, the casual acceptance of their abuse as a daily expectation, pierced Henry's heart with unbearable guilt. He recognized in that sickening flash that this was not a moment of accidental cruelty. This was the chronic, toxic climate of his supposed sanctuary, meticulously concealed beneath a veneer of wealth and order. The man who dictated global mergers and commanded private security forces was utterly humiliated by the domestic tyranny of his own wife. He finally detached from the wall, his movements slow and purposeful, like a mountain beginning to shift. Mama Grace looked up, and the deep sorrow that instantly replaced the shock in her eyes was a heavier indictment than any official judgment. She knew instantly he had witnessed the full, brutal truth. Henry did not speak a single word to his mother or his sons. To offer comfort now would be to validate and expose their profound pain. He simply gave them a sharp, brief nod, a terrifying mixture of apology and command for absolute silence. He then pivoted, his face a granite mask, and marched toward the main house. His expensive leather shoes struck the polished marble with harsh, echoing finality. He was no longer the absent investor. He was the enraged, shamed patriarch returning to purge his corrupted home. He found Vivian in the grand, cool living salon, perfectly poised, reviewing jewelry sketches on her enormous tablet, while sipping a rare vintage hibiscus cooler. The room smelled of expensive leather and fresh lilies, completely insulated from the distress and filth outside. She looked up, her expression smoothly transitioning from disinterest to a captivating, prepared delight. "Henry, my darling, you're home early. I wish your silly guards had announced you. What a marvelous surprise." She rose gracefully, her designer dress whispering against the silk chaise, moving toward him with a perfected smile and an outstretched, manicured hand. She stopped abruptly, inches from him. The air between them, moments ago thick with artificial pleasantries, suddenly turned cold and suffocating. Vivian's keen socialite senses registered the rigidity of his stance, the unfamiliar deep-set anger etching lines around his usually smooth face, and the dark, focused fury in his eyes. She dropped her hand, her smile fracturing into a nervous, tentative frown. "What is it, Henry? Is it the Abuja deal? Did those politicians betray you?" she asked, her voice losing its sweetness and sharpening with professional concern, not for his stress but for the potential financial fallout. Henry ignored her, walking past her, his gaze sweeping over the gaudy opulence of the room. The Murano glass, the solid gold frames, the carefully curated photographs of them celebrating their false happiness. He turned to face her, his massive frame towering over her, the protracted silence allowing only the distant hum of the central air conditioning to remain. He spoke, and his voice was devastatingly low, flat, and hollow, lacking any trace of familiar warmth. "Vivian," he said, his voice entirely emptied of endearment. "I did not return to discuss the deal. I came home to see the reality of my family life." He paused, letting his statement sink in like a heavy anchor. "I walked in through the service corridor. I came upon you." He watched her face closely. For a devastating second, her composure faltered, revealing a raw flicker of panicked, naked fear and rapid calculation, which she instantly cloaked in theatrical, aggressive indignation. "I saw you pour that filthy, toxic water, that residue from your vanity, directly over my aged mother and my young sons, who were forced to wash their own clothes because you forbade staff from touching them." Vivian straightened, her spine rigid, her chin lifted in defiant righteousness. "They are utterly spoiled, Henry. They lack discipline. And Mama Grace constantly interferes with my authority in this house. She is old and stubborn. And that was just harmless soapy water. It was an accident. I was emptying a basin. I did not see them clearly beneath the railing." Her lie was polished, automatic, delivered with convincing speed, but the brutal image of her deliberate act remained dominant in Henry's memory. Henry's legendary self-control, the absolute command that allowed him to control massive corporations, now focused his searing rage into a terrifying crystalline calm. He bypassed her desperate denial. "I saw your face, Vivian. I saw the pure, cold satisfaction in your eyes before you disappeared back inside." He slowly reached out and picked up a heavy obsidian African sculpture of a protective spirit that sat nearby. He held it, the cold, ancient weight emphasizing his resolve, not his aggression. "This is no longer your home. You will not sleep in my bed tonight. You will remain in this house until dawn, organizing your immediate belongings. But by the time the sun rises fully over the lagoon tomorrow, you will be gone. Every access point, every card, every vestige of your presence in my life will be utterly erased." He replaced the statue with a soft, decisive click that felt louder than a bomb blast in the silent room. Vivian's beautiful facade finally shattered as the full, unimaginable consequence of his cold, clinical ruthlessness hit her. She realized the man she married was not merely rich, but an absolute power, and the loss was not just of luxury, but of her very identity. Vivian stood paralyzed, her chest heaving beneath the expensive silk, the initial shock giving way to a frantic, calculating terror. To be divorced by Henry Akinola was not simply to lose a husband, it was to be exiled from the highest echelon of global society, to lose the very oxygen of her ambition. She had married the money, the power, and the unassailable status, and the threat of total severance was a fate worse than poverty. Her eyes, still wide with disbelief, scanned the exquisite room, seeing not furniture but collateral. The imported chandeliers, the rare Persian rugs, the massive safe hidden behind a wall panel, all slipping through her grasp. She knew Henry's reputation. His decisions, once made, were final, delivered with surgical precision, and absolute lack of emotion. But Vivian was a fighter, a master manipulator who had clawed her way from obscurity into this light, and she would not surrender her crown without a bloody, dramatic struggle. She had to fracture his resolve, appeal to his ego, or, failing that, employ the most devastating weapon a woman can use against a powerful image-obsessed man: public scandal. She dropped the mask of injured dignity and instantly adopted the role of the hysterical, wronged wife, complete with genuine manufactured tears. She threw herself toward him, clutching his arm, her body trembling dramatically. "Henry! My love! You can't mean that! This is madness! It's exhaustion! You saw a fraction of a moment. You didn't understand the context," she wailed, her voice rising to a pitch of genuine distress, though her eyes were dry and darting with calculation. "I do love you. I love the boys. I am trying to discipline them, to make them worthy heirs to your legacy. They were disobedient, running around in filthy clothes. I was trying to teach them respect. Mama Grace encourages their laziness. Don't let your mother poison your mind against the woman who has brought so much grace and modernity to your life." She was appealing directly to his vanity and his well-known desire for a sophisticated modern home that contrasted with his rural origins. She emphasized the grace and modernity, hitting the precise nerve she knew made him feel secure about his social ascent. Henry remained utterly unmoved, his expression remote and cold, like watching a dramatic performance in a language he no longer understood. He gently, but firmly, detached her hands from his arm. "Do not touch me, Vivian." His voice was low, heavy with finality. "I watched you. I saw your eyes. There was no discipline. There was only malice. And my sons and my mother were forced to wash their own clothes because you, the wife of Chief Henry, Akinola, decided they were beneath the dignity of your staff. Do you know the shame that brings upon my name? Not the divorce, Vivian, but the shame of knowing the character of the woman I brought into this home." He began to walk away toward his private study, a clear sign the conversation was over. Vivian saw her opportunity fading and desperation took over, forcing her to deploy the ultimate career-ending threat, a threat that targeted not his heart, but his business empire and public image. She lunged past him, blocking the heavy mahogany door to the study. "No, you will listen. You think you can just discard me?" She spat, her beauty momentarily marred by raw fury. "You forget, Henry, that I know everything. The offshore accounts you use for your discretionary funds, the ones you don't declare to the tax board. The secret business deals in Ghana where you paid cash to avoid local restrictions. I was signing documents. I was your trusted companion. You toss me out, and I promise you I will make sure the Nigerian press and the international regulators hear every sordid detail. You will be facing investigations, frozen assets, and a public scandal that will strip that immaculate reputation to shreds." Her threat was sharp, precise, and aimed directly at the foundation of his entire financial structure. For a flicker of a second, Henry's composure wavered, his eyes narrowing as he weighed her threat. The man of power, however, instantly recalculated, finding his center. He looked at her, and a thin, terrible smile touched his lips, a smile of cold, professional finality. "Vivian," he stated, his voice now regaining its CEO authority, "my divorce attorney, Barrister Johnson, will contact you before midnight. I am 3 steps ahead of you. Every document you signed was vetted. Every account you think you know about is a decoy, a distraction I created precisely for moments like this." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that was all the more terrifying for its quiet precision. "You confuse my love for vulnerability. I am Henry Akinola. I built an empire on calculated risk. You are a footnote. Try to ruin me, and I will ensure you do not just lose your wealth, you will lose your freedom." He stood straight, opened the study door and walked in, leaving her standing alone, her brilliant threat reduced to nothing but dust. Vivian watched the heavy mahogany door close, the definitive end to her magnificent life. And a chilling, deep-seated terror replaced her anger as she realized she had not just lost a husband, but had utterly underestimated the ruthlessness of the lion she had tried to cage. Inside the cool sanctity of his private study, the door securely locked against the turmoil he had just unleashed, Chief Henry Akinola sank into his leather chair, the mask of the ruthless Titan finally slipping away. The silence of the room, broken only by the low hum of the dehumidifier, suddenly felt vast and unforgiving. He was a man accustomed to confronting and conquering existential threats, market crashes, political coups, industrial sabotage, but this betrayal was a domestic cancer that targeted his very soul. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the mahogany desk, burying his face in his hands. The horrifying image replayed, the dark, oily water cascading over his mother's white head tie, the instant, fearful resignation in the eyes of his sons, David and Sam. That image was not a scene of conflict. It was evidence of his profound failure as a son and a father. He had traded true comfort for a beautiful facade, prioritizing his international image over the sanctity of his own home. And he was now staring at the wreckage of his own moral compromise. He raised his head, his eyes settling on a small framed photograph that rested on his desk, a faded image of Mama Grace from decades ago, proudly standing beside him in his university graduation gown. In that photo, her eyes held the pure, unquestioning pride of a mother who sacrificed everything. This woman who sold her meager roadside provisions to ensure his education was now being deliberately humiliated and starved in a back annex of the mansion built by his success. A wave of gut-wrenching shame washed over him. He realized that Vivian's cruelty was merely the symptom. His extended absence and deliberate blindness to the domestic sphere were the disease. His wealth had created a fortress, but his neglect had allowed a wolf to enter the gate. His swift, brutal decision to dismiss Vivian was not merely justice for his family. It was an act of brutal self-preservation, a necessary surgery to save his own corrupted heart before the infection spread. He knew he had to apologize, not with money or gifts, but with the immediate, tangible action of restoration. Henry picked up the internal phone line, bypassing the staff intercom, and called the security head, Musa, who was waiting discreetly in the corridor. His voice, though still low, was now heavy with quiet authority. He issued a flurry of cold, precise instructions. Vivian was to be monitored but not physically engaged. All her outside communication was to be blocked, and all her financial accounts were to be instantly frozen. The mansion's most exclusive wing, the master suite and the adjoining guest rooms, was to be immediately prepared for the return of Mama Grace and the boys, complete with a dedicated, loyal personal chef and a nurse. He ordered the immediate firing of any staff member who had witnessed the abuse and failed to report it, or worse, who had actively participated in the neglect of the annex. He was purging the house of every trace of Vivian's influence, tearing down the false structure she had built, brick by cold brick, to make the house habitable for the souls he had nearly lost. His thoughts then turned to his sons, David and Sam. He had been an ATM machine to them, an occasional presence, not a father. He had compensated for time with money, substituting connection with expensive gadgets. He knew that for children, humiliation lingers longer than a bruise. Their silent, brave resignation was the evidence of a systematic breaking of their spirit, a wound that needed more than just a change of address. He had to show them, tangibly and unequivocally, that their safety, dignity, and their grandmother were paramount, more important than his business, more important than his public image, and certainly more important than Vivian's existence. He made a vow, silent but ironclad, that no matter the cost to his empire, the balance of his life was permanently shifting. The pursuit of wealth had ended, the work of rebuilding his family was beginning, and it would start now, tonight, with the deepest humility he could muster. He finally stood up, his posture now straightened not by arrogance but by a new, focused purpose. He left the study, not toward the grand staircase, but toward the service corridor, the path he had taken upon his unexpected return. He needed to walk back to the back annex, to the place of the shame, and face the three people who represented the true wealth he had almost destroyed. He was prepared to kneel if necessary. He was prepared to beg forgiveness for his neglect. The most difficult conversation of his life awaited him, a conversation far more terrifying than any hostile corporate takeover. As he reached the back corridor, he hesitated, hearing the faint sound of his mother's weak, wavering voice, lifted in a prayer of thanks, and realized the depth of the grace he was about to ask forgiveness from. The air in the rear annex was thick with the faint smell of dirt, soap, and lingering anxiety. Mama Grace had finished her prayer, her heart fluttering with a mixture of overwhelming relief and deep, abiding dread. She was relieved that the eyes of her son, Henry, had finally been opened to the darkness that plagued his home. But she dreaded the confrontation that was sure to follow. She had spent a lifetime protecting her son's peace, swallowing insults and bearing burdens so he could thrive. Now the peace was shattered, and she knew the consequences of dismissing a woman like Vivian would be vast and complicated, threatening the stability Henry had worked so hard to achieve. She looked at David and Sam, who were quietly drying their salvaged uniforms, their faces pale but their eyes now holding a flicker of hope they hadn't possessed in months. She knew the fight was not over. The serpent had been seen but not yet crushed. The annex door swung open and Chief Henry Akinola stepped in, filling the small space with his towering presence. He looked neither like the ruthless billionaire nor the arrogant husband. He looked broken, his tailored suit suddenly appearing like a costume on a man undone by grief. He didn't speak the grand words of apology she might have expected. Instead, he knelt on the hard concrete floor, a deliberate, excruciating act of humility from a man who only knelt for God. He looked directly at his mother, his eyes raw with unshed tears. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking with the force of his emotion. I saw everything. I am sorry. Not for Vivian's cruelty, but for my blindness, for my absence. I built this mansion and exiled the best part of my life to the dirt. Forgive me." His apology was not a formality. It was a confession delivered with the full weight of a man who realized he had nearly destroyed the very foundation of his success. Mama Grace placed her small, wrinkled hand on his massive shoulder. She didn't accept the apology instantly. She merely let the silence acknowledge the depth of his transgression. "My son," she said, her voice soft but firm, the true voice of the family matriarch. "You ask forgiveness from me, but your betrayal was not against my comfort. It was against your own peace and the souls of these two boys." She gestured to David and Sam, who watched the exchange with wide, solemn eyes. "You gave a wicked woman the authority that belongs to the spirit of this house. Go to your sons, Henry. They need not your money but your presence. They need to know that their father is stronger than the fear that has lived in their chests." Her words were a redirection, reminding him that the material apology of the mansion was secondary to the emotional and spiritual work he now had to undertake. Henry stood, his face set with purpose, and walked over to David and Sam. He squatted down to their level, his eyes meeting theirs. "My sons," he said, using the traditional Yoruba term of endearment, "Omo mi. I am so sorry I let that woman frighten you. I promise you, with the deepest vow of my heart, she will never touch you again. She is gone." He pulled them close, wrapping his strong arms around their small bony shoulders. David the elder remained stiff and cautious, conditioned by months of psychological warfare to suspect any sudden warmth. But little Sam, the younger, burrowed his face into his father's expensive suit and let out a soft, delayed sob, the sound of fear finally released. That small, broken sound was the final key that unlocked Henry's own heart, and for the first time in years, the powerful Chief Henry Akinola wept, not over a lost deal, but over the lost time with his own children. As the emotional reconciliation unfolded in the annex, a parallel drama was reaching its climax in the main house. Vivian, realizing her threats against Henry's business empire were useless, had resorted to a desperate physical scramble. Under the cloak of night, monitored only by Henry's silent, distant security surveillance, she was systematically smashing every expensive piece of crockery, tearing the silk curtains and defacing the art she couldn't steal, a final act of spite against the home she was losing. Her calculated rage reached a fever pitch as she located Henry's personal safe, not the decoy one she had. Threatened, but the true vault, containing sensitive documents, antique gold, and a heavy velvet box. She managed, using a forgotten code she had seen Henry input during a rushed moment, to force the safe open. She didn't want the documents, she wanted the contents of that velvet box, a legendary priceless diamond necklace, the star of the lagoon, Henry's intended gift to her for their 5th anniversary. She snatched the box, her fingers trembling with greedy triumph, realizing this one stolen object might secure her future, even if her marriage was ruined. As she secured the priceless necklace beneath her gown, she heard a sudden sharp rap on the front door, an unexpected late-night visitor she was forbidden to receive. The sharp rap on the massive carved mahogany front door resonated through the silent, opulent mansion, freezing Vivian in her tracks. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against the silk covering the stolen Star of the Lagoon diamond necklace. Her entire posture shifted from vengeful fury to instant panicked calculation. Henry's orders were clear: no one was to be contacted, and no one was to enter. Who could be at the door? It was too late for social calls, and Henry's closest associates would use the private intercom, not the main entry. Peering through the security monitor, her eyes widened in a dangerous mix of relief and renewed malice. Standing at the entrance was Osa, Henry's ambitious former chief financial officer, a man Henry had recently fired for corporate espionage, a man whom Vivian had secretly cultivated as a backup plan, knowing he still held a deep, unquenched desire for Henry's power, and perhaps for her. Vivian quickly composed herself, forcing her features into a mask of distressed vulnerability. She knew Osa was desperate for leverage against Henry. She saw this unexpected arrival not as an inconvenience, but as a final desperate lifeline, a chance to turn the tables on the man who had just sentenced her to oblivion. She rushed to the door, ignoring the chilling look of the silent security guard posted nearby, and dramatically pulled it open. "Oh, sir! Thank heavens! You must help me," she whispered, her voice laced with manufactured panic. Osa, sleek and sharp in an immaculate suit, stepped in, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of professional curiosity and barely concealed personal interest. He had come hoping to find Henry isolated and weakened after the Abuja deal failure, but instead, he found the beautiful Vivian distraught and alone, a far more tempting opportunity for vengeance. Osa wasted no time. "Where is Henry? I heard rumors the Abuja deal collapsed. I came to warn him about the market fallout, but this place smells like disaster." He surveyed the room, his gaze catching the overturned vase and the slight tear in the silk drapery, his curiosity piqued. Vivian clutched his arm, leading him away from the security guard's sightline, pulling him into a shadowed alcove. "Henry didn't tell you? He's having a nervous breakdown. He's gone mad with stress. He's talking about freezing all my accounts, throwing me out, all because of a misunderstanding with his old mother." She was careful to omit the actual abuse, framing Henry's reaction as irrational cruelty fueled by stress. She then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, a temptation he couldn't refuse. But I have something Osa, something that will utterly destroy him, something that proves his instability. I need your help to get me out of here before he comes back and locks me away." She then subtly revealed the heavy velvet box clutched in her hand, giving Osa a tantalizing glimpse of the famous Star of the Lagoon necklace. Osa's eyes, trained to value assets, instantly recognized the piece. He knew its value could buy a small country, and its disappearance would not only cripple Henry financially, but utterly shame him publicly. He looked from the necklace to Vivian's distressed, beautiful face, the allure of both power and the woman mixing into an irresistible cocktail of greed and revenge. "What do you want, Vivian?" "I'll help you," he said, his voice low and guttural. "But Henry Akinola is a lion, and I need more than a piece of jewelry to risk my life. What information do you have that will truly crush him?" He was demanding the high-stakes intelligence that could secure his return to power. Vivian knew she had to offer him the one thing that was truly irreplaceable: the location of Henry's secure offshore data servers, which contained the proprietary algorithms for his core telecommunications software, the true blueprint of his empire. She leaned in, her breath hot against his ear, whispering the secret access code and the coordinates. "Get me out of this country tonight, Osa, and you can have the data. His entire company is built on that code. Steal that, and he is ruined." Osa stared at her, the sudden access to unimaginable power and wealth making his head spin. The sight of her desperate, beautiful face and the weight of the stolen diamond in his mind cemented his choice. He nodded sharply, a ruthless, victorious glint in his eyes, but just as he did, the internal alarm on his own watch began to flash, signaling a message he could not ignore, an urgent warning from his informant that Chief Henry Akinola's security team had detected his entry and was already moving to intercept them. The silent internal security alarm on Osa's watch, a discreet piece of technology designed to warn him of corporate risks, now screamed a private, life-threatening danger. Chief Henry Akinola's security protocols had not failed. They had simply been overridden by Henry's command. Osa knew Henry's security chief, Musa, was a relentless professional, and they had mere seconds before the compound gates would seal and the house would be flooded with guards. He shoved the panicked Vivian toward the service entrance. "No more talk! They are coming! Give me! The necklace now!" he hissed, his voice raw with urgency. Vivian, driven by pure survival instinct, reluctantly slipped the heavy velvet box into his hand. The weight of the Star of the Lagoon felt like a hot, magnetic guarantee of her future. She knew that without the necklace or the data, Osa would abandon her instantly. They burst out of the back door, abandoning the opulent air conditioning for the humid, breathless heat of the Lagos night, sprinting toward Osa's car parked near the perimeter wall. At that same moment in the annex, Henry Akinola was kneeling beside his sons, David and Sam, the solemn, silent reconciliation having eased his heart, but sharpened his mind. He received an urgent coded message from Musa via a secure earpiece. Intruder detected. Wife engaged. Moving to intercept. Henry's face immediately hardened, the brief moment of paternal warmth replaced by the cold focus of a CEO confronting a hostile takeover. He knew instantly who the intruder was. Only Osa, his former CFO, would be audacious and foolish enough to enter his private sanctuary at night, and only Osa knew enough about his life to be tempted by Vivian. This was not merely theft. This was a calculated attempt at his total destruction using the very weakness he had brought into his home. He stood up, his massive frame radiating controlled fury. He gave Mama Grace one last look of solemn reassurance. "Stay here, Mama. It is done, but the loose ends must be cut." Henry exited the annex and strode toward the main house, retrieving a small, secure phone from his pocket. He was no longer just the husband or the father. He was the head of a corporation under direct, physical attack. He contacted his personal intelligence team, ordering the immediate full deployment of his private security apparatus to track Osa's vehicle and ensure the physical recovery of the stolen asset, the necklace, and the digital asset. The proprietary code Vivian had revealed. He was not pursuing a thief. He was neutralizing a threat to his entire global enterprise. He also made a quick, chilling call to his chief attorney, Barrister Johnson, instructing him to launch an immediate preemptive civil suit against Vivian for theft, slander, and corporate espionage. Henry wanted Osa's capture, but he wanted Vivian's legal ruin, a final absolute severing that would ensure her total silence and isolation. Osa's black Mercedes sedan screeched to a halt near the perimeter wall, the powerful engine revving impatiently as they waited for a planned momentary lapse in the external security network. Vivian threw herself into the passenger seat, her heart pounding against the certainty of impending freedom. Osa slammed his foot down on the accelerator just as the temporary security lapse opened a small window in the gate mechanism. They hurtled through the narrow gap, the heavy gate slicing shut milliseconds behind them with a loud metallic clang that echoed like a final period mark on Henry's marriage. They were free of the compound, plunging into the labyrinthine roads of Ikoyi under the veil of the humid night. Vivian laughed, a wild, hysterical sound of triumphant release, clinging to Osa's arm. "We did it! We are free! Drive, Osa! Get us to the airport now!" But the triumph was momentary and thin. Osa, navigating the dense, chaotic traffic of the city, saw a black SUV with tinted windows, a familiar, unmistakable sign of Henry Akinola's elite security team, emerge from a side street and begin a silent, relentless tale. They were not free. They were being hunted, methodically and ruthlessly, by a man whose power extended far beyond the walls of his mansion. Osa, realizing the gravity of the danger, looked at Vivian, not with desire, but with a cold, terrifying calculation. He had the necklace, and the data. She was now merely a complication, a liability that slowed him down. He swerved violently into an alleyway, hitting the brakes, and turned to Vivian, his face contorted into a mask of sudden cold betrayal, realizing her usefulness had just expired. The screech of the tires and the sudden violent stop in the narrow dark alley threw Vivian forward against the dashboard. She stared at Osa, her breath catching in her throat, realizing the terrible error in her choice of ally. His handsome face was now a mask of cold predatory intent. "Get out, Vivian," he commanded, his voice devoid of all warmth or partnership. "They're right behind us. You slow me down. I have what I need." He gestured to the heavy velvet box on the seat beside him. The star of the lagoon was now his, and his alone. Vivian's mind raced, cycling through terror and incandescent fury. She had played the ultimate game of high stakes, trading her safety for vengeance, and now she was being discarded in a filthy, lightless backstreet of the very city where she had once reigned supreme. "No, you promised! We were partners!" she shrieked, clawing desperately at his jacket. Osa backhanded her across the face with brutal, dismissive force. The impact stunned her, leaving a sharp, stinging pain and the metallic taste of blood. "I promised you freedom, not a partnership, fool," he snarled. "You're Henry's liability, not mine. Stay here and confuse them. Buy me time." He shoved her violently out of the car and roared the engine to life, leaving her sprawled on the asphalt amidst rubbish and stagnant water, the scent of fear and betrayal replacing the French perfume. Vivian watched in disbelief as the taillights of the Mercedes vanished around the corner, leaving her utterly alone, a beautiful, wealthy woman stripped of her protection, her status, and her power, now reduced to a terrified figure in the unforgiving Lagos night. Meanwhile, back in the Ilady, Henry Akinola was in his study, monitoring the pursuit through a secure satellite link. He watched the real-time visual of Osa abandoning Vivian in the dark street, and his face remained impassive. The betrayal of the friend and the treachery of the wife were now merely tactical problems to be solved. He knew that Osa, driven by the hunger for the necklace and the data, would head directly for the international private airport terminal. Henry directed his team to avoid a public confrontation, emphasizing discretion and swiftness. He was determined to neutralize this threat cleanly, protecting his family's privacy and his company's integrity from the impending public spectacle Vivian had promised. The pursuit was now a cold corporate exercise in asset recovery. Yet, despite his professional focus, Henry could not entirely suppress the deep spiritual turmoil churning within him. He was a man who believed in karma and divine order, and he knew this crisis was not an attack on him, but a consequence of his own moral drift. He had sought a wife who looked good on the arm of a billionaire, ignoring the advice of his Mama Grace, who had quietly warned him about the emptiness behind Vivian's dazzling eyes. He had allowed his ambition to overshadow his spiritual duty to his first wife's memory and to his son's well-being. This entire night, the filth poured on his mother, the fear in his sons, the massive corporate risk, and the violence of the pursuit, was the bitter harvest of his own neglect and vanity. The loss of the necklace or the data felt less painful than the realization of his own moral bankruptcy. In the dark alley, Vivian slowly picked herself up, the physical pain nothing compared to the shock of Osa's brutal abandonment. The sting of the slap ignited a ferocious, primal rage. She had nothing left to lose. Her marriage was destroyed, her assets were frozen, and she had just been betrayed by her last ally. Her only path now was pure, unadulterated vengeance against Osa for the betrayal and, even more fiercely, against Henry for his cold, surgical execution of her life. She pulled out a small, untraceable phone she had kept hidden, a last, desperate insurance policy, and called the one person who could guarantee a massive public scandal. A powerful, unscrupulous investigative journalist known for destroying reputations. Her whispered confession into the phone was not an act of surrender, but a final explosive declaration of war against her husband's empire. The lion had been provoked, and the venomous snake, wounded and cornered, was preparing its final destructive strike. The pursuit was a silent, high-stakes game of chess played across the sprawling midnight chessboard of Lagos. Osa, driven by the certainty of the immense wealth he now held, the physical gold of the Star of the Lagoon and the digital gold of Henry Akinola's proprietary code, drove with reckless, desperate speed toward the private air terminal. He knew his only chance was to take off before Henry's network could mobilize the necessary federal authority to ground his chartered jet. He was a man consumed by avarice, his mind fixated only on the coordinates of his escape and the life of unimaginable luxury that awaited him beyond the shores of Nigeria. The betrayal of Vivian was a minor footnote, a necessary calculation in his ruthless pursuit of power. Back in the Ikoyi alley, Vivian's call to the notorious journalist Chike was a torrent of bitter accusations. She painted Henry not as a wronged man, but as a cruel, abusive tyrant who had just fired his mother and son's caretakers and was now attempting to have his wife murdered on the street to cover up massive offshore tax fraud and corporate espionage. All while his mother, Mama Grace, suffered neglected in a dusty shack. She used every half-truth and lie she possessed, twisting the narrative into a sensational story that would paralyze Henry's stock and trigger immediate regulatory investigations. Cheek, sensing the scandal of the decade involving one of Africa's richest men, greedily guaranteed a front-page exposé within hours, promising to make Henry's name synonymous with corruption and abuse. Henry, receiving immediate intelligence regarding Vivian's reckless call to the media, felt a sharp internal twist of pain. He had anticipated her financial and corporate threats, but he had underestimated her willingness to publicly dishonor his mother and his sons. The threat now was not just to his company, but to the dignity of his family, the very thing he was trying to restore. The shame of having the world read twisted tales of Mama Grace's alleged neglect while she slept peacefully in his restored master suite was a deeper wound than the loss of any diamond. This media war required a precise, immediate counterstrike that preserved his integrity and exposed Vivian's lies without becoming entangled in her dramatic spectacle. His focus, however, remained on the physical threat, Osa. Henry's security team, led by the astute Musa, cornered Osa's vehicle just minutes from the airport perimeter fence. The tension was palpable. Henry refused to allow a violent confrontation, knowing the legal complications and public attention it would generate. Osa, seeing the roadblock and the armed, silent security detail, realized his escape was impossible. He knew Henry would not negotiate. In a final desperate act of defiance, Osa ripped the velvet box open, grabbing the Star of the Lagoon necklace. He also smashed his secure tablet, ensuring that the proprietary corporate data Vivian had revealed was instantly corrupted and worthless. A final act of industrial sabotage against Henry. Osa, the once powerful CFO, was dragged from the car, clutching the glittering diamond necklace in his fist, a defeated man who had traded his career, his freedom, and his last shred of honor for a handful of jewels. Henry, watching the capture live on his screen, felt no triumph, only a deep weariness. The physical threat was neutralized, the diamond was recovered, but the moral and media battle was just beginning. He turned, from the screen his gaze falling upon the image of his mother. He knew he had to stop the story, not for his stock price, but for Mama Grace's peace. Henry reached for the secure line, making a call to the highest level of government, a call he had vowed never to make, to request a personal emergency intervention to halt the press scandal that Vivian had unleashed. The first rays of the Lagos sun were painting the sky a fierce, bruised orange as Chief Henry Akinola concluded his urgent, unprecedented call to the capital. He had requested a personal audience, not as a business magnate, but as a humiliated patriarch, appealing to shared cultural values and the need to protect his mother's dignity from Vivian's reckless media war. This call, a direct plea to the nation's highest authorities, was an admission of domestic vulnerability that could have severe political and corporate ramifications. Yet, Henry understood that rebuilding his honor required public humility. He secured a temporary, high-level intervention to halt the immediate publishing of Cheek's sensational exposé, buying himself a crucial 24 hours to shape the narrative and prevent the total contamination of his name. He knew that the government's assistance was not a free gift. He had traded a measure of his autonomy for his family's peace, a price he was now willing to pay. His first act after hanging up was to visit his mother, Mama Grace, who was already awake and dressed in the freshly laundered white linen she favored, seated in the beautifully restored master suite. Henry knelt before her, placing the recovered Star of the Lagoon necklace, the physical symbol of the night's chaos, not back into his vault, but into her open, waiting palms. Mama, this stone caused the greed, the lies, and the violence. Its value means nothing to me. But I returned it to you because you are the true jewel of this house. It is a symbol of my restored sight. He did not ask her to wear it or sell it. He presented it as an object, redeemed by the truth. Mama Grace looked down at the glittering diamond, then back at her son, her eyes radiating a deep, ancient wisdom. She did not praise his ruthlessness. She merely acknowledged the spiritual shift. Henry, she said, her voice soft but authoritative, you have acted like a king protecting his palace. But the true battle is not against Vivian and Osa. It is within you. You chose to be blind. Now you must choose to be a father. She gently pushed the velvet box containing the necklace back toward him. This stone has no place in the heart of our home. Sell it. Its value should not fuel luxury, but must be used to redeem the neglect you showed your sons. Her command was clear. The money from the vanity project must now fund a spiritual restoration. Henry immediately understood the profound wisdom. The proceeds of the diamond would be dedicated to a charitable foundation in his first wife's name, specifically focused on supporting children's education, a perpetual act of tithing to compensate for his moral debt and to cleanse the ill-gotten karma of the night. Meanwhile, in the holding facility, Osa was being processed for corporate theft and industrial espionage. He sat in his bespoke suit, his face bruised and his power shattered, clutching the futile, corrupted digital data that Vivian had given him, the blueprint to Henry's downfall that had turned into dust. He had gambled on the greed of the diamond and the false partnership of the wife, and lost everything. He called out in desperation for Vivian, but she was nowhere to be found. Unbeknownst to him, Vivian, bruised and running on pure spite, had taken refuge with her family, preparing for her next move, a massive public counterattack on social media, bypassing Henry's official media block, threatening to expose the location of Henry's mother and sons, thereby forcing Henry to choose between their safety and his silence. Henry, receiving this critical intelligence about Vivian's renewed threat, the weaponization of his children's location, knew he had to move faster than the speed of a viral post. He could not rely on government help for this. He needed a personal public act of courage. He gathered Mama Grace, David and Sam and, bypassing the front gate, took them in a simple family sedan to the most important destination of his empire, the corporate headquarters on Lagos Island. He prepared to face the world press and his entire company, not with a denial, but with the entire, raw, unvarnished truth of his failure. As he stood on the stage of his own auditorium facing the glaring lights of global media, he knew that a confession of neglect was the only way to protect his future and finally silence the treacherous woman he had called his wife. The stage was set in the glittering, futuristic auditorium of Chief Henry Akinola's corporate headquarters, an arena usually reserved for announcing billion-dollar mergers. Now it was the site of a profound public family reckoning. The world press watched via livestream as Henry walked onto the stage, not in his usual power stance, but with a humble, measured gait, accompanied by Mama Grace, David, and Sam. The two boys, dressed in simple, clean clothes, stood shyly yet resolutely beside their grandmother, who held her head high with ancient dignity. Henry stood at the podium, facing the searing lights and the cameras, and began to speak, not with the polished language of a CEO, but with the raw, emotional voice of a repentant man. "I am here today not as a CEO, but as a son and a father," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Yesterday, I discovered a profound and shameful truth that my obsession with success and public image had made me utterly blind to the suffering and dignity of my own family." He confessed the neglect, how he had allowed Vivian's vanity to displace his mother and sons to the annex, and how his indifference had created an environment where cruelty could thrive. He then described the exact moment of his enlightenment, recounting the horror of seeing the filthy water poured over Mama Grace. He did not accuse Vivian. He confessed his own moral failure. This was not a press conference. It was a public act of spiritual cleansing, a ritual of redemption played out on a global stage, silencing the journalists who had prepared sensational headlines of his downfall. The emotional impact was immediate and staggering. The sight of the powerful Chief Henry Akinola admitting his domestic failure, placing his mother and sons above his market share, resonated deeply with the African public, who valued family respect above all earthly wealth. He then announced the immediate legal establishment of the Mama Yinka Foundation for Children's Dignity, endowed with the full proceeds from the sale of the Star of the Lagoon necklace, the material symbol of his restored moral compass. The Foundation's charter was simple: to ensure no child in need lacked education or dignity. This act of public tithe and humility instantly turned the tide. The government, Satisfied by this public display of honour, Insured Cheek's scandalous story could not run, and the public rallied fiercely around the image of the billionaire who found his soul. Watching the live broadcast from her hiding place, Vivian's last weapon, the promise of public shame, was neutralised. She had bet her entire future on Henry's pride and his fear of public opinion, and he had countered her move with radical humility and honesty. Her image of Henry as a proud, untouchable tyrant was demolished, replaced by the image of a vulnerable, responsible patriarch. Her desperate social media posts, now live, detailing the supposed neglect in the annex, looked petty and vindictive next to the televised image of Mama Grace's dignified, peaceful presence on the stage. Her lies were exposed not by Henry's denial, but by his truth. Her final, desperate plot to use the press to destroy him had ironically become the ultimate catalyst for his personal and public redemption. In a quiet moment backstage after the press conference concluded, Mama Grace took Henry's hands, her eyes glowing with genuine pride. "You have learned the most important truth, my son," she whispered, "that a name built on truth cannot be broken by a lie. You chose your family over your fear. Now the spirit of your true house can finally be at peace. The burden of the night, the years of neglect, and the fear of scandal lifted entirely from Henry's shoulders. He was still a billionaire, but he was a man transformed, grounded by the love and wisdom of his mother and the recovered souls of his sons. The divine turnaround was complete. The day that should have ended his career instead cemented his legacy, teaching him that the true measure of a man is found not in his portfolio, but in his home. Following the earth-shaking press conference, Chief Henry Akinola did not return to his office to handle the market fluctuations. He returned to the E-Lady and initiated the final absolute cleansing of his domain. The luxurious mansion was systematically stripped of every object and aesthetic choice that Vivian had imposed. The abstract art was replaced by traditional Nigerian sculptures, the cold metallic accessories by warm, handcrafted pieces, and the minimalist decor gave way to the comfortable, inviting warmth of a true family home. He was symbolically tearing down the shrine of vanity and rebuilding a sanctuary of kinship, all under the gentle guiding eye of Mama Grace. The most significant change was not physical, but relational. Henry devoted his entire afternoon to his sons, David and Sam, starting with a simple, prolonged game of football on the compound lawn, a childhood ritual he had neglected for years. The boys, initially hesitant and watchful, slowly began to relax, their laughter returning with a pure, joyous sound that Henry had almost forgotten. For the first time in their memory, their father was truly present, his phone silenced, his focus unwavering. This deliberate sacrificial commitment of his precious time was the ultimate healing balm. Henry, accustomed to analysing market data and corporate risks, now focused intently on their small, detailed concerns. David's worry about his mathematics test, and Sam's detailed descriptions of his favourite comic book heroes. He was learning how to be a father again, building a foundation of trust that Vivian's cruelty had tried to shatter, proving that the spiritual work was more challenging and infinitely more rewarding than the material one. Meanwhile, Vivian's final hours in the city were marked by escalating desperation. Her social media attack had backfired, drawing widespread public condemnation. She was legally served with Henry's civil suit for corporate theft and slander, a document that promised total financial ruin and the possible seizure of all her remaining hidden assets. Abandoned by her family who feared Henry's wrath and shunned by the society she had valued so highly, she became a ghost in the city she once ruled. She knew her only option was to flee the country immediately, but the public notoriety of Henry's press conference meant every airport security detail was on high alert for her face. She was trapped, a venomous snake caught in a glass jar, her own spite having sealed her fate. Henry, having received intelligence that Vivian was cornered, made one final clinical decision to ensure his family's peace. He instructed his legal team to prepare a final settlement, a document granting Vivian a small, non-negotiable lump sum of money, just enough to start a modest, anonymous life abroad far from the glare of Lagos. This was not an act of forgiveness, but a calculated investment in his own future peace, ensuring she was removed and incentivized to remain silent forever. He traded a small fraction of his wealth for absolute permanent separation and the avoidance of a messy, prolonged public divorce trial that would further dishonor his sons. His redemption was complete. He had rescued his family and rebuilt his honor, transforming a moment of personal collapse into a foundation for a noble legacy. Later that evening, as the last rays of light faded over the Lagos lagoon, Henry sat with his mother and his sons, enjoying a simple home-cooked meal prepared by a dedicated new chef. The food tasted sweeter than any banquet, seasoned with peace and reconciliation. Mama Grace smiled, her eyes conveying volumes of silent approval. Henry looked at his sons, who were arguing playfully over the last piece of plantain, completely unafraid and secure. He had lost a fortune in business reputation and gained an infinite measure of dignity. He realized then that the true worth of a man is not measured by the depth of his pocket, but by the security of the roof he builds over the heads of the people he loves. A lesson bought at the highest, most painful price. The calculated settlement offer reached Vivian late that night via a highly secure diplomatic courier. The sight of the official document, granting her a final modest financial lifeline in exchange for permanent anonymous exile, ignited a final cold flare of rage. She tore the paper, but her fury quickly died down, replaced by a devastating raw realization. Henry Akinola had not destroyed her out of spite, but out of absolute clinical necessity. His public humility had stripped her of all power and all allies. She was no longer facing a wounded husband, but an immovable mountain of righteous public opinion. She realized she was not just beaten, she was erased. Accepting the offer was the only path left to survival. She quietly gathered a single small bag, leaving behind the mountain of designer clothes and jewels that were now worthless symbols of her failure. Under the cloak of the deepest hours before dawn, Vivian made her way to the small, discreet airport where Henry's team had arranged her anonymous, one-way passage out of the country. She moved like a phantom, her once commanding presence reduced to that of a frightened fugitive. As she waited in the empty terminal, she looked out at the lights of Lagos Island, recognizing the glittering towers as monuments to the life she had bought, abused, and ultimately lost. A wave of regret, cold and sharp, finally pierced her hardened heart. It was not regret for her cruelty, but regret for the monumental price she had paid for her vanity. She had destroyed the only real wealth, the opportunity for security and status, through her own blinding greed. Her descent was complete. The beautiful woman who sought a kingdom was leaving in total, desolate solitude. At the Elady, the mood was one of quiet, profound renewal. Mama Grace oversaw the preparation of the new master suite for David and Sam, ensuring every detail, from the colours of the walls to the thickness of the blankets, spoke of comfort and unconditional love. The two boys, sleeping soundly in the luxurious room, represented the recovered heart of the home. Henry, watching them sleep, felt a peace he had not known since before his first wife's passing. He had spent years pursuing happiness in market victories and corporate expansion, only to find it in the simple, unbroken rhythm of his children's breathing. He understood that his true work now was not expanding his network, but maintaining the integrity of this sanctuary he had fought so hard to reclaim. The final act of domestic cleansing came with the official dismissal of every staff member who had participated in the neglect of the annex. Henry spoke to them not with anger but with sorrow. He explained that a house serves its inhabitants, not the other way around, and that their silence in the face of cruelty was a betrayal of the basic human trust that holds a family together. He ensured they were paid their full wages, but their contracts with the Akinola name were terminated forever. He was sealing off the memory of the darkness, ensuring that the air in his home would only be breathable by those whose hearts were guided by decency and loyalty. The security team, led by the fiercely loyal Musa, was immediately promoted and lauded for their professionalism in the night's pursuit, confirming that loyalty would always be rewarded. As the morning sun climbed over the lagoon, bathing the Aladi in a hopeful golden light, Henry received the final, confirmed report. Vivian's flight had successfully departed, and the contract sealing her silence was in effect. The chapter of betrayal and cruelty was definitively closed. He walked into his kitchen, not his study, and prepared tea for his mother, a simple act of servitude that held more meaning than any business negotiation. He watched as David and Sam bounded down the stairs, their faces bright with the confidence of children who feel utterly secure. The house was no longer a beautiful cage built for show, but a true home, redeemed by pain, sacrifice, and the unwavering grace of a mother's love. The years that followed the dramatic events on Lagos Island solidified Chief Henry Akinola's transformation from a successful billionaire into an honourable man. He made a monumental, life-altering decision. He stepped back from the relentless day-to-day operations of his global enterprise, appointing a trusted CEO to handle the corporate expansion. His primary focus shifted entirely to the domestic sphere and the burgeoning philanthropic work of the Mama Yinka Foundation. He traded the boardroom for the classroom, volunteering his time to mentor young entrepreneurs and overseeing the foundation's work in building schools and ensuring children across Nigeria received the dignity and education they deserved, the very dignity he had nearly denied his own sons. His relationship with David and Sam blossomed, nourished by an unrelenting commitment to presence. He attended every school event, coached their youth football team, and instituted a daily ritual of reading and discussion, forging a deep, unshakable bond that no amount of money could have purchased. He taught them the value of the family name, explaining that wealth was a tool, but honor was the true legacy. The boys grew into strong, secure young men, confident in their father's love and deeply respectful of their grandmother, Mama Grace, whose wisdom became the constant, quiet foundation of their lives. She never again lived in the annex. She occupied a beautiful suite in the main wing, her presence the spiritual heart of the home. The Mama Yinka Foundation, funded by the sale of the Star of the Lagoon and countless other resources, became Henry's most significant and enduring legacy. It was recognized globally not just for its funding, but for its ethical approach to empowering vulnerable children, directly contrasting the greed and exploitation that had defined his darkest period. The name Henry Akinola became synonymous with redemption, integrity, and profound generosity. His story, the dramatic fall and subsequent moral resurrection, was studied in business schools not as a lesson in market strategy, but as a parable of ethical leadership and the true cost of moral neglect, a universal tale resonating far beyond the shores of the lagoon. Vivian vanished completely from the public eye. Her exiled life, financed by the small final settlement, was one of bitter, resentful anonymity in a small, distant city. She was forced to work and live without the status and luxury she craved, her former life a shimmering ghost that tormented her days. Her only legacy was the cautionary tale she represented, a woman who saw the greatest wealth, love, family, and status, and threw it away for petty greed and malice. She occasionally attempted to reach out to Henry, but his firewall, both digital and emotional, was impenetrable. She remained a solitary figure, her great beauty wasted, her punishment the endless, agonizing regret for the kingdom she willfully abandoned. Years passed, marked not by corporate acquisitions, but by graduations, birthdays, and quiet, meaningful evenings spent on the terrace, watching the sunset over the lagoon. The scars of the past remained, but they had healed into lessons, not wounds. Henry Akinola was no longer the restless, success-driven titan. He was a man at peace, his true wealth residing in the laughter of his sons and the serene presence of his mother. His final cinematic act came on the day David, his eldest son, was set to leave for university abroad. Henry drove David to the airport, just the two of them, in a simple family car, a symbolic rejection of the extravagant, lonely life he once lived. They stood at the departure gate, and Henry, now older, wiser, and visibly happier, looked at the young man who stood before him, a testament to his successful redemption. "David," Henry said, his voice husky with pride and emotion, "you are leaving this home, but you carry its spirit with you. That spirit is built on honor, respect for your grandmother, and the knowledge that a man's true power is found in his self-control." He reached into his pocket, not pulling out a massive check, but a small, worn piece of parchment, a copy of the anonymous settlement agreement Vivian had signed years ago. "Keep this," he instructed, placing the paper in David's hand. "It is not a document of hate, but a reminder. It is proof that a crisis must be met, not with vengeance, but with decisive clinical preservation of your peace. Use your fortune, but never let it use you." David nodded, understanding the profound lesson wrapped in the simple discarded paper. He hugged his father fiercely, a genuine, unreserved embrace that spanned all the years of neglect and subsequent devotion. He knew his father's story was his greatest inheritance. As David walked toward the gate, he paused and looked back, catching his father's proud gaze, confirming the silent, unbreakable promise of their restored bond. Henry watched him leave, his heart full, the final pieces of his broken family tapestry woven back together into something stronger and more beautiful than before. The man who nearly lost everything had finally learned where true value lies, securing a legacy of love that no market crash could ever touch. The final scene fades with Chief Henry Akinola returning home to the quiet, dignified comfort of the Ilady, where Mama Grace and Sam wait for him on the terrace. The lights of the Lagos Towers glitter in the distance, symbols of the world he commands, but no longer craves. He sits down, takes his mother's hand, and looks out at the sprawling city, a picture of profound, hard-won peace. The story of the billionaire who chose his family over his vanity, who found his soul on the floor of a dusty annex, is complete, ready to be told across the continent and beyond. The wealth that costs you your soul is poverty. The only jewel that truly shines is the honor in your home.